Us. This is the France 24 debate, and we're waking up to the news of an all-German final, looking at the German model. We've done it often in the France 24 debate. In this instance, though, we're applying it to football, and we're applying it with Andres Jürger of Eurosport, also with us France 24's Dan Levy, Jerome Pugmire of the Associated Press, and joining us from Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, Stefan Szymanski, co-author of Soccernomics. Just before the break, Andreas and Jerome were mentioning 1998, France hosts a World Cup, the tournament a success for the hosts who win it. France not only has a trophy and refurbished stadiums to brag about, it also has an envied model of rigorous training centers that sprouted some of Europe's best players. Problem is, the best ones today play abroad, and the top team in France today, well, hardly follows the German model. Qatar swooping for Paris Saint-Germain, and stars like Swedish striker Zlatan Ibrahimovic, stars well beyond the price range of, I guess we could say, every single other French club. And Dan, when you look at on both sides of the Rhine, a few years back, people in France were claiming that their football league was almost at the same level as the Bundesliga.
It clearly isn't in terms of the European success at the moment, and it clearly isn't in terms of, I think, the entertainment on the pitch. I don't mean to be too disparaging about Ligue 1, but it's sort of been known for the last, I'd say, decade or two as having a lot fewer goals per game.
But was there a missed opportunity after the 1998 World Cup? Could the French have done any better?
Could they have what? Could they have run their clubs better?
Could they have enticed their talent to stay?
I think they could have, but to do that, you would need more money, which is something that Jerome was talking about earlier. And to do that, you would probably need better TV revenue and a better marketed league. And to be fair, the Bundesliga doesn't get the most out of its marketability. You know, that's something that Stefan was saying. You know, they can't quite monetize it to the point that they could. But they do a much better job of it than Ligue 1. And Bundesliga has a lot more going for it on the pitch as well than Ligue 1 does. And it just has better teams at the moment. And Germany, as Jerome was saying, has done a much better job of keeping the talent there, and that's partly to do with the way they centralised all of their training systems. That was a decision made around the turn of the millennium, when they decided to make sure that clubs have to check in with the national system, with the national federation, and have coaching patterns that reflect the principles and the ideals of the national team, and that has, I think, reaped dividends. And also, they have a lot of players in Germany who are very, very well educated in terms of their behaviour off the pitch and the way they conduct themselves, and I think they just are kind of a lot sager, really, and they're a lot more interested in having success at the clubs through which they're brought.
No Twitter mishaps.
Yeah, a lot fewer, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned '98. You look at the France team that won. The main players from that team, Zidane did not play in France. Patrick Vieira didn't play in France. Marcel Desailly did not play in France at that period. So they missed an opportunity, perhaps, afterwards. But France has always been a selling league. They can't afford the wages, and also now we're seeing with the 75% tax bracket. How can a player stay in France when he's offered more money elsewhere and he's going to pay less tax elsewhere?
That's another thing you have to take into account is the system German football is ruled. Television money is given to all the clubs. It's a centralized system,
which is not the case in places like Spain.
That's a big difference. So Real Madrid or in England, teams, or in Italy, AC Milan, they will negotiate the television rights directly with channels. Whereas in Germany, it's the DFL, German league, who will deal for the rights, and then all the teams get first an amount, and then according to their placement in the first, second, or third division, they get money. They get money back. So that is a system which makes sure that at least you have every year, according to the ranking, you get money to spend, and you're sure of getting your license. And this is an interesting thing. And the other interesting thing is in Germany, the club always has to have 50% plus one share. So a club can't be taken over by an investor from Qatar, from Russia, and so on. So the clubs, they still are in charge of the club. They won't give it away. That's a big system, and a big interesting point when you see what happened to Malaga, for example, this season in Spain, where someone from Qatar has put money in. Then at some time there is a problem the money is put out, and the club is in deep financial crisis.
We had that with West Ham a few years ago in England when there was, I think it's a Finnish investor, and then the money
investors in England who just never seem to have existed even.
Well, yeah, when West Ham and when the money just they just disappeared.
Yeah.
So.
London newspaper The Independent taking aim at Europe and the Premiership for a free spending system that the paper feels is coming home to haunt its powerhouse clubs. It says the curse of European football's boom has been that revenues come in one door, flow out in inflated players' wages and obscene agents' commissions, leaving little for investment, but not in Germany, it says. Stefan Szymanski, again, you're looking at this model, you're looking at clubs like Malaga, which are now in deep hot water. And it's funny because we're talking about the same sort of economic imbalances we talked about just 24 hours ago on this very set when we were talking about economics.
Right, but I think some of the things that are being said now are just plain crazy. I mean, people are inferring from one or two games a complete change in philosophy, which has no basis in fact. So I mean, Andreas was talking. I'm sorry, Andreas, what you were saying about TV rights is just plain rubbish. The only country in Europe that has individual selling of broadcast rights is Spain. England has sale of broadcast rights. It's almost exactly identical to the German system. I don't know how you think that it's any different. France do, Italy do. So I mean, it's not to do with the way that the rights are sold. And as for the ownership issue, well, frankly, I don't see how what Dietmar Hopp did at Hoffenheim, which was basically a small local club where he came in and threw hundreds of millions of euros into buying a successful team and then saw them rise to the top of the Bundesliga. I don't really see how that's any different from what's going on at Paris Saint-Germain or Manchester City. It's the same thing. In terms of the actual outcome on the field, and so I think we need to sort of also bear in mind just what's happened in the last few years. In the last few years, only Bayern Munich amongst German teams has had any success at all in Europe, and that has been rather limited, whereas English, Spanish, and Spanish teams in particular have completely dominated the competition for the last 10 years. So it's just absurd to say that somehow there's this on the basis.
So what are you saying? This is a one-off, or is there a pendulum swing?
Well, okay, there may be a pendulum swing, but not because of the virtues of the German system, but because of the regulation that is being imposed by UEFA through financial fair play. What UEFA are doing through financial fair play is saying that is requiring clubs not to have deficits. Now, pretty much every country in Europe has historically had a system whereby rich individuals throw their own money into making clubs successful because they want the reflected glory of that success. And financial fair play is saying that's not going to happen anymore. In that world, then, the clubs that have the biggest revenues from ticket sales, broadcast rights, and merchandising and sponsorship will be the clubs that dominate. Which countries in Europe have the biggest revenues? Well, they will be in the future. They will be Germany and probably England. So what's really happening is that the southern nations, particularly Spain and Italy, which have traditionally been powers in Europe, where because of their financial problems, because of their essentially small markets as well, they will no longer be able to compete. Now, that might be something that people would think is a good thing, that clubs allegedly live within their means, but it also means that people who that in countries where people have traditionally had strongly supported the subsidy of clubs because they love their teams, that can no longer happen.
Hang on a sec. Are you suggesting, Stefan, that Germany is, in a sense, writing the rules for Europe to suit their needs?
No, I think that would be a little bit too simplistic. I think it's certainly true that in terms of developing the rules of financial fair play, those rules were largely came from the German model, and the Germans were very strong, and they're obviously very influential in UEFA in pushing their model. But in the end, UEFA is a democracy amongst the member associations, and all the member associations agreed. So I don't think, and I think this is where the parallels with Europe come in, which is that you can't blame Germany for the creation of the euro and the problems that it's created. Because everybody agreed. It wasn't just Germany saying that these should be the rules. Everybody agreed to the rules. Everybody agreed to the rules of financial fair play. What people don't like are the consequences of the rules that they agreed to. And maybe they shouldn't have agreed to the rules in the first place if these are the consequences.
And the consequences spelled out by the boss of UEFA, Frenchman Michel Platini, the concept that clubs can't spend more than they earn. It's due to go into effect next year across the continent.
I have been deeply convinced since the start that a club should not spend more money than it generates.
I think Hoffenheim are clearly an exception in the Bundesliga in what happened with Hopp and the owner. And obviously you have Wolfsburg and Leverkusen, who are owned by basically Volkswagen and Bayer, but they're pretty well run financially. But I think as well you have to look at something that Stefan is touching on, is the fact that there's a kind of natural advantage which is paralleled by the investment from a foreign investor or the unlimited wealth of a foreign investor, which is being in a big city, having large global appeal, and having a large catchment area in which to bring in rich fans. And those things are not available to everybody, in the same way that having a sort of benevolent billionaire is not available to everybody either. And also, if you look at Germany, Bayern are pretty much the side that you could argue that you've got Bayern and Dortmund in the final, and Dortmund have won the 2 titles in the last previous years before this one, and they won the double last year, beating Bayern in the final 5-2. But Bayern look really like the team set to take off. They're the ones who could well do the treble this year, and they're also going to start next season with possibly Dortmund's 2 best players, Goetze and Lewandowski. Goetze already on his way, and Lewandowski will probably go the season after.
But Jerome, to take this analogy further, do you agree when Stefan says that, much in the same way that the rules of the Eurozone have come back to haunt Southern Europe, the rules of financial fair play are also going to come back to haunt the rest of Europe?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the rules are going to be applied. If clubs get their spending in quickly and buy some very big names before the rules really kick in, I think they'll be okay. If you take the example of Paris Saint-Germain, it'd be interesting to see what happens, because there's such massive investment already. Over 250 million euros.
It was a QTA deal, right? I mean, that would be interesting to see what happens with that.
With the tourism authority. But PSG now, I mean, next season, they'll really be under pressure to do something in the Champions League before the financial fair play rules kick in. So it'd be very good to see how they do next season.
I see Stefan Szymanski shaking his head.
Right, that's just plain wrong. The rules of financial fair play are already in place. Basically, the way it works is you have to break even on the basis of an average of the previous 3 seasons, which include this season and last season. So Paris Saint-Germain, everything they've spent this season and last season counts against financial fair play. So they're in deep trouble when it comes to the rules.
It does count, Stefan, but there's an allowance, isn't there, at first of 45 million euros, and then it decreases over time. So it's not completely coming into effect immediately at the level it will be in a few years' time. It is gradually coming into place.
Yeah, but it's pretty likely that they're going to be in excess of the 45 million euro rules, as are a number of clubs. I mean, basically, on the figures, UEFA said this year that in terms of break-even, there are 85 clubs in the top divisions that wouldn't meet the break-even rules, and 21% of clubs that qualified for the Champions League or the Europa League wouldn't have met the break-even rules. So it's far from being just the sort of the standout cases of the sugar daddies like PSG or Manchester City. It's actually quite a widespread problem. And because football has, there is nothing new about insolvency. Insolvency has been a characteristic of football across Europe since the year dot. And it's also been a characteristic of German football. There are plenty of cases of insolvency in German football.
Well, Dortmund nearly went out of business.
Right, and if imagine Manchester United had subsidised, I don't know, Portsmouth 10 years ago, and said, and this year Portsmouth were now in the Champions League final, everybody would be crying foul and saying that's terrible, that shouldn't be allowed. But Bayern Munich subsidized Dortmund. Dortmund are in the final now, and everybody says, "Isn't this an example of the wonderful German model?" This is not. I'm not trying to get at Germany. I think it's just people have to take a reality check and look at what's really happening in the way that football works, rather than sticking to these kind of very simplistic narratives, which is the same. And there's the same parallel with the Euro. We see in the Euro crisis, we see very simple narratives embraced on both sides. Oh, the Southern Europeans are lazy. Oh, the Germans are too mean and are trying to dominate the continent. It's not about that. It's about the way that rules work and the way that decision-making interacts with rules.
So you're saying that a lot of the clubs still have a lot of financial issues, much as the Eurozone nations, Andreas, are having trouble abiding by their own rules when it comes to budget deficits, and everyone's kind of agreed that for the time being we're in a crisis, everybody can fudge them a little. Is it going to be the same thing when it comes to financial fair play?
I can't see this. I mean, you have to define that as well. You have to define as well. When we're talking about revenue and spend what you earn, I'd really like to know then what counts into revenue, how you can hide revenues or you can hide salaries. It has been in the past. The tax measure the French government has put on 75% over the first million earned, if it's really implied like that, would lead to a massive exodus from foreign players in France.
UEFA will be key. I mean, I think there's a lot of room for manoeuvre for UEFA in the regulations they've put forth.
At the end of the day, is the pecking order of European football going to change?
Not really, I don't think. No, I mean, the top three leagues at the moment are Spain, England and Germany, and I don't think that's going to change. You might see a boost in the UEFA coefficients because of Germany's performance this season. But I think Spain won't be disappearing as a European force in football.
It's also a question of the sanctions. I mean, the sanctions have to be applied. If sanctions are going to be taken against clubs, they still have to be applied. Will UEFA actually apply them?
All right.
You have to wait and see on that.
Stefan Szymanski, you agree?
Well, yeah, I mean, Germany's already taken a UEFA Champions League spot away from Italy, and that's the most that it can do. So we've already seen the rebalancing going on. But one thing that this whole discussion has missed out on is the fact that really it's not we shouldn't really be thinking about comparing domestic leagues. That's a very old-fashioned and not very European way of thinking about it. What we have in Europe are big clubs: Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, and so on. And these are the clubs that dominate competition. And really, the insolvency and the financial problems that we see are not an issue of national rules and regulations. It's an issue of small clubs being unable to keep up with these big rivals.
And the big boys are squeezing the small ones across the continent. Stefan Szymanski, I want to thank you for joining us from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I want to thank our guests in the studio, Dan Levy, Andreas Jürger, and Jerome Pugmeier. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.